The planet Cateros was a world defined by its crushing gravity and endless, churning mud. It was a miserable rock, rich in heavy metals but hostile to almost all forms of life. It was here that the human mining expedition made first contact with the Aethel. The Aethel were not natives of the mud. They were the Skylords. They were tall, elegant beings who viewed the ground as a place of filth and primitive suffering. They lived in Ethelgard, a magnificent, shimmering citadel that floated 5 miles above the surface, held aloft by advanced anti-gravity field generators. To the Aethel, warfare was a detached, almost aesthetic experience. They didn't deploy troops to the ground, that would sully their boots. Instead, they hovered above the human mining camps, dropping cleansing lances, beams of focused plasma that vaporized men and machines instantly. They watched the destruction on high-resolution screens, sipping nectar in climate-controlled gardens, viewing the human struggle as one might view an anthill being burned with a magnifying glass. They are creatures of the dirt, High Lord Valerius sneered, watching a human refinery explode far below. Look how they scurry in the muck. They build their little walls and fire their little kinetic slugs at the clouds. They do not understand that we are untouchable. We are above their reach, above their gravity, above their petty existence. For 6 months, the human forces on Cateros were systematically dismantled. Their surface-to-air missiles couldn't reach the citadel's altitude through the dense atmosphere. Their lasers were diffused by the constant storms. They were rats in a barrel being picked off by a sniper who lived on the moon. The human commander, General Hardtrack Thorn, was not a pilot. He was not a space marine. He was a planetary siege engineer. He had spent 40 years breaking things that didn't want to be broken, usually by applying excessive amounts of torque and high explosives. He sat in his command bunker, watching the ceiling vibrate from another orbital bombardment. He didn't look up at the sky with fear. He looked down at the blueprint of the Aethel Citadel's gravitational footprint. They think they're clever because they turned off gravity, Thorn grumbled, chewing on a stale cigar. But gravity isn't a light switch, kid. It's a law. You can borrow against it, but eventually the bank wants its interest back. He slammed his fist onto the table, pointing at the floating city. They want to stay up there? Fine. We're going to help them down. Get me the heavy rigging division. The humans stopped trying to shoot the city down. They started building. Under the cover of the planet's perpetual storms, the humans assembled the harpoon crawlers. These were not military vehicles. They were modified planetary strip mining machines. Each one was the size of an aircraft carrier, moving on treads so wide they crushed forests flat. They anchored themselves deep into the planet's bedrock using tectonic pylons. Mounted on top of each crawler was a magnetic accelerator cannon the size of a skyscraper. Loaded into each cannon was a gravity anchor, a solid tungsten spear 50 feet long, tipped with an explosive penetrator head. Trailing behind each spear was the real weapon, 10 miles of braided, reinforced carbon nanotube and shipyard steel cable, thick enough to drive a tank through. Up in Ethelgard, the alarms faintly chimed. High Lord Valerius looked at his tactical display, confused. The groundlings, he noted with amusement. They are pointing large tubes at us. Do they think to throw spears 5 miles into the sky? The atmospheric density alone will stop them. Valerius didn't understand the gospel of momentum. Fire 1 through 4. General Thorn roared over the comms. Tum, 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 tum. The sound was apocalyptic. 4 massive slugs of tungsten, heavier than any aircraft, were accelerated to hypersonic speeds. They screamed upwards through the dense atmosphere, punching through the storm clouds like the fists of an angry god. The air didn't stop them. They were too heavy, too fast. High above, the serene silence of Ethelgard was shattered. The first harpoon struck the base of the floating city. It didn't just hit, it buried itself 50 feet deep into the citadel's primary hull plating. The explosive tip detonated deep inside, flaring the majestic barb outwards, locking it permanently into the city's structure. 3 more impacts rocked the citadel, shattering crystalline towers and sending the Aethel nobility tumbling from their garden balconies. "We are hit," an Aethel officer screamed, his elegant face pale with shock. "Hull breaches on lower levels. They have thrown metal spikes at us." "Irrelevant," Valerius shouted, regaining his composure. "They are primitive projectiles. Our anti-gravity field is stable. We remain aloft. Prepare the retaliation lances." Valerius looked out the viewing port. He saw the 4 massive cables trailing down from the impact sites, disappearing into the clouds below. "What are those lines?" he whispered. Down in the mud, General Thorn watched the tension gauges on his console. Hooked and locked, he grinned, his teeth stained with tobacco. All right, boys. Let's go fishing. Engage the winches. The harpoon crawlers anchored to the bedrock of the planet began to pull. The massive industrial winches, designed to tear mountains apart, groaned to life. The miles-long cables went taut. They vibrated with a sound like a low-frequency cello string that could be felt in the teeth of everyone on the planet. Up in the sky, Ethelgard lurched violently. The anti-gravity generators were designed to lift the city's weight, plus a safety margin. They were not designed to lift the city against the active downward pull of 4 planetary-scale industrial winches anchored to the crust of a high-gravity world. Warning. Gravimetric strain exceeding 400%. The Aethel computer shrieked. We are losing altitude. The pristine floating city began to tilt. The beautiful towers leaned precariously. Swimming pools emptied onto the streets below. The Aethel, who had never experienced a floor that wasn't perfectly level, slid panicking across their polished decks. Cut the lines. Valerius roared. Use the cutting lasers. Sever those cables. The Aethel engineers fired their high-intensity lasers at the thick steel ropes. The outer layers glowed red-hot, spalling off sparks the size of cars, but the core held. The cables were too thick, too tough. They were built by a species that understood heavy lifting. They aren't cutting fast enough, my lord, the officer cried. The strain on the engines. The field projectors are overheating. Down below, the winches kept turning. Slowly. Inexorably. The cables screamed as they wound onto drums the size of houses. Crack boom. High above, one of the Ethelgard's primary anti-gravity engines exploded under the strain. The city dropped 100 feet in a second, the sudden jolt snapping secondary spires off the main hull. Reel him in. Thorn yelled, feeling the vibration of the success through his boots. Don't give him slack. Bring that shiny piece of trash down to our level. The descent was terrifying to behold. The gargantuan city, once a symbol of untouchable grace, was being dragged down through the clouds like a stubborn beast being pulled to the slaughterhouse. It tilted further, 45 degrees, then 50. The Aethel inside were clinging to furniture, staring out the windows as the hated mud world rushed up to meet them. High Lord Valerius stood at the tilted window of his bridge, watching the ground approach. For the first time in his immortal life, he felt the crushing, undeniable reality of gravity. This is impossible, he whispered as the cloud layer parted, revealing the muddy, scarred landscape and the massive human machines that had undone them. They cannot just pull down the sky. Brace for impact, the computer screamed one last time. The bottom of Ethelgard clipped a mountain peak, shearing off a stabilizing fin. Then, with a sound that cracked the tectonic plates of Cateros, the floating city slammed into the mud. The impact was cataclysmic. A wave of mud and rock 1,000 feet high was displaced, burying the surrounding landscape. The beautiful crystalline towers shattered into a billion pieces. The pristine white hull was instantly coated in the thick brown sludge it had despised for so long. The city didn't break apart completely, it just embedded itself deep into the muck, a broken, tilted monument to arrogance. Hours later, General Thorn walked up the tilted ramp of the crashed citadel. His boots were caked in mud up to his knees. He was flanked by soldiers carrying heavy rifles and industrial cutting torches. They found High Lord Valerius trapped under a fallen crystalline beam in what used to be his throne room. The alien looked up at the human, his beautiful robes ruined, his face streaked with dirt. You. Valerius gasped, coughing up dust. You are barbarians. You defiled the sky. You brought the heavens down into the dirt. Thorn looked around at the ruined, mud-soaked splendor of the alien palace. He took the cigar out of his mouth and crushed it under his muddy boot on the pristine floor. You got it backwards, pal, Thorn growled. We didn't bring the heavens down. We just reminded you that gravity doesn't care how pretty your engines are. You want to float above us? Fine. But if you throw rocks at the guys on the ground, don't be surprised when we throw a rope back and pull you down for a chat. He signaled his men to secure the prisoner. Welcome to the mud, your highness. Try not to get it on your nice shoes. The conquest of Cateros was over. The humans didn't need to fly to win the war. They just needed enough cable and enough torque to prove that everything in the universe, no matter how high and mighty, eventually has to come down. Humanity had proven the ultimate industrial HFY truth. You can have technology that defies the laws of physics. You can float above the fray like a god. But if a human engineer can figure out how to attach a hook to your divine chariot, we aren't going to build wings to fight you. We're going to build a winch, anchor ourselves to the ground, and drag your ass down into the dirt with the rest of us. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. What goes up must come down. Especially if we're pulling on it. If you enjoyed this visceral victory of gravity over arrogance, hit that like button. Comment below. What's the biggest thing you think humanity could reel in with enough cable? Subscribe for the next story in the New Frontier saga. The Memory Starvers. The line is taut. The city is grounded.